Let's turn our attention this morning to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12, we're going to pick it up at verse 41. We are in the midst of a message by Jesus about the meaning of life. And we're trying to understand, what is life really about? What is the first principle or first principles of human existence? And we're going to start off with Peter interjects a question which will benefit us in understanding who should be ready and how to recognize that I am ready. So this is really, we'll start with the question. Luke chapter 12 and verse 41, it says, "And Peter said, 'Lord, are you addressing this parable to us or to everyone else as well?'" So first off, he talks about this parable. And you'd have to have been a couple weeks back and to realize that parable and the instruction, it reaches all the way back to verse 16, 12:16. It's a parable is a story with a message to it, a point to it. And he wants to know, who is this aimed at? Who is this story aimed at? And we looked at the story and understand about that story is this man who has an abundance, and he wants to know what to do with that abundance. And so he goes through a process of considering his surplus. He plans to build bigger barns. He ends up, though, being a fool because he is unprepared for his death. So Peter wants to know, how does this fit, this parable, this story fit to us? Because sometimes Jesus would tell a parable directly at, like he said that he talked to the Pharisees and they realized that he spoke this parable against them or with them or toward them. And so that had a very narrow question. Very focused on wanting to know who this is about. And it's interesting to note, you have to keep in mind how Jesus answers or does not answer this question is important to understanding this next section we're going to look at. Because Jesus doesn't really seem to want to tell them that it's a narrow focus. Because he really wants us to realize, I think, with them, is that we have to allow it to apply in a more general way. So when we get to the difficulty, the real difficulty is it gets pretty harsh. And it gets pretty difficult in some of the words he says, as we'll get to this morning. And part of it has to realize that he's not just talking to somebody else. We have to apply it whether it fits us. And so we have to keep that in mind. So what he does, let's give the overall context. So he tells this parable, and this parable is based upon somebody shouting out from the crowd and said, "Hey, have my brother give my inheritance, split up or divided up." And we don't know the motive behind it, but he says, be very careful about forms of greed. Then he points out, life is not about the abundance of stuff, even if you have it. So that's how the parable starts. And I explained just a little bit about the parable and kind of summarizing it at the end of this is at 12:20, Luke 12:20. "But God said to him, 'You fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and how, or who really, and now who will own what you have prepared?'" Then he summarized it. "So is the man who lays up treasure," and this is important, "for himself and is not rich toward God." So that's what the parable is. You say, well, who's it talking about? Who's it directed? Is it really directed? Who's the man? Who's the man in the story? And Jesus really doesn't answer it like Peter wants to. He wants him to narrow it down. So he tells this parable and he says, you have to think about it. What does it mean to be rich toward God? What does it mean that you lay up treasure for yourself? So Jesus lets that hang. He summarizes it. But then he goes on. There's this whole section in between that he gives, and we talked about it. There are 12 principles, and we talked about that these are foundational principles, first principles. Sometimes people describe them as these are the basics. And he's talking about these principles. And I'll just give you a few of them. If you want, you have to look back. But basically, life is not about worrying. Life is not about worrying. Life is more than the basics. That we should consider the way the animals function and are taken care of and be worry-free in our perspective. That we should seek the kingdom first because we can involve ourselves with that because there's certain things we cannot change at all. God allows us to seek the kingdom, but there's stuff that we can't even change. We can't change our height. We can't change how long we're going to live because God has determined that. So there's no use in worrying about it, but this is the stop to make sure that we know how to be rich toward God and not to be a fool. We're to focus on those things that God will allow us to change. And what he will allow us to deal with is seeking the kingdom first. And we need to trust God. So we avoid being anxiety over the basics because we prioritize seeking the kingdom first. That's kind of how he summarizes it. And the idea, this is in Luke chapter 12 and verse 31, but seek first his kingdom and these things shall be added to you. And the thing is that, so if I want to be, connect to the parable, if I want to be rich toward God, if I don't want to be a fool, and I need to make sure, if I want to be rich toward God, I got to seek the kingdom first. And the thing is that's how I have to be prioritized. I will be a fool if I do not prioritize the kingdom first. So we're just following along in this parable. I know it's gathering a lot of information. Please kind of connect it because this is important when he gets to the next part. So then he explains what is life like to be seeking the kingdom. What it's about to seek the kingdom. What does it look like? Then he describes, this is from 12:31 to 40, is that don't be afraid to prioritize the kingdom. Then he talks about seeking the kingdom is about giving and not hoarding. Seeking the kingdom means putting your treasure in heaven. Seeking the kingdom affects your heart, because where your treasure is, your heart will be also. And then this last section, which this is what the message is going to be connected to, seeking the kingdom is to be ready for the coming of Christ. If I am prioritizing my life right, and I am going to be rich toward God, I have to be ready with a sense of urgency. I have to realize that if I am going to be ready for the kingdom, I don't set dates, but I expect any date. That's the difference. That's the idea of readiness, is that I am unexpected. I have an unexpected part and an expected part. Okay? So being ready for the return of Christ means seeking the kingdom. I seek the kingdom and be ready. So this is what we're going to learn this morning. Hopefully got that all connected. You can read and kind of catch up or whatever. But there are two realities that make it urgent to be faithful. So how is it that I can practically get ready, practically be ready for the kingdom? Do I sell all my stuff, move up north, build a bunker, and then store all my food? Or do I build walls around my house? Well, this is where we're going to start out. So Peter asked the question, and now we're going to go back to Luke 12:42. Being ready for the kingdom, being truly not a fool but wise, encompasses this: to be a faithful and sensible servant. 12:42, it says, "And the Lord said, Who then is the faithful and sensible steward, whom his master will put in charge of his servants to give them their rations at the proper time? So, being ready for the return of Christ is being a faithful manager. A steward is like a manager, it's like a team leader, it's like a director. Okay, even though he's going to be called a slave or a servant, realize that he has people under him. So he's not just the lowest rung of it. His job, his function is to carry out a responsibility. He is thoughtful, he is wise, he is sensible. I am ready because I am thoughtful, wise. If I want to be, I get to choose. This is in my choice. I get to choose whether I'm going to be sensible and faithful. Okay? I get to choose. I need to make active choices to do that, and I will be held responsible. So he illustrates it it's kind of a type of illustration about rations. It's about food. And what happens is this individual, this steward, has people under them that he has responsibility over their portion. And so he has to give them their stuff and the time. So timing is important. What is a sensible and a wise servant or manager? So if you're a Christian, you're a manager. Well, how is that? I am managing what God has given me and the people underneath him. If you're a parent, any role, function, basically you have a spiritual gift. You are managing what God has given you. Time is critical. Now you may say some cultures time doesn't matter, but time is very critical. The thing is, if you're hungry, and all of my kids, every one of them, were always hungry, probably because they got it from their dad. But the thing is that I was an incredible metabolism, eating and needing to eat. And so the thing is that hungry, you can't sit there and say, like my mom used to do, it says she wasn't hungry, she'd have the kids wait. I mean, the kids need every meal and snacks in between the meals. Okay, that's how they ate. And but the thing is that timing is very important. So being faithful, if I am ready for the return of Christ, I have to be faithful. I have to be taking care of my assigned responsibility. It involves timing, and it involves effort, and it involves the idea of consistency. And again, everybody has an area. Interesting, I just want to point out the word servant there is kind of it's not the normal word for servant. It's actually what we get the word therapy from. And so it kind of has this idea of people, I don't know if it has a physical, spiritual, social idea, but it's kind of like those under therapy. It kind of has that your health of them or taking care of them. So the sensible manager remains vigilant in his duties. It means we got to treat people decent, fair, provide for them as God has enabled us. This is the role of a father. This is the role of a boss. This is the role of a mother. How do I know I'm ready? Is because I'm taking my responsibility. I am timing that responsibility and keeping it to happen on a consistent basis to care for the people who are underneath my responsibility. Now, this is a physical analogy, but realize this, and I want you to turn with me to 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10. Because as a believer, you are entrusted with a spiritual gift. Now, in general terms, there's only really two categories of gift. 1 Peter 4:10. Two categories of spiritual gift, and they are speaking ones and they are serving ones. That's really, if you want to know, well, I need to know specific. You don't need to know specific. You're either talking or you're helping. Okay? But it says this, each one has received a special gift, employed in serving one another as good stewards, same thing, managers of the manifold, multicolored, multivaried grace of God. So every believer has a gift, and that gift is to be used in the service. There's no exemption. The only exemption is if you're not a Christian. Okay, that's a different issue, but the idea is you're supposed to be using your gift, and that gift is designed, and Dave's doing a part of that, almost like kind of a small series about servanthood in the body of Christ. This is the involvement. This is the laboratory to which God has entrusted. We have 3 areas of responsibility. The area of believers is the use of our spiritual gift. The unbelievers is evangelism, and the overall overarching is to worship and honor God. So your relationship with God, relationship with others, and with other believers. So we have to be, so you are a steward. Am I serving with my speaking gift or my serving gift within a body of believers towards other believers in the way that God designs? I have an assigned, there's nobody who doesn't have an assigned task or gift. So when it talks about being ready for the return of Christ, I have to be ready by using my gift. That's what it looks like. If I am functioning with my gift. Let's turn back to Luke chapter 12, verse 43. There we pick up the blessing where it talks about the blessing of doing my responsibility. He goes on to say, blessed is that slave, servant, that manager, whom his master finds so doing when he comes. So being ready for the coming of Christ means finding you fulfilling your assigned role. He is going to show up, or the type of preparation that he could show up, not that you're hiding out, not that you're somehow avoiding people because you're afraid of what's going on, that you are doing what he has told you to do, using your gift. Too often, the idea is that people think, I'm ready because I've got water stored in the basement, because I have beans stored close to it, and the thing is that I have a gun or something. You understand? Or somehow I have property that I can hide at, or whatever, if everything goes. That's not being ready. By Christ's definition, ready is that you'll be serving. That's ready. You'll be serving him for his purposes that he's assigned to you. And the blessing is when he finds you doing the tasks simply what he's asked you to do. This is not merely planning. This is not talking. This is not just thinking about the task. It means acting. The blessing lies in active participation. Everything, stewardship. Stewardship, responsibility. Manager, responsibility. He goes on to further explain this blessing. In Luke chapter 12, verse 44, truly, truly, I say that he will put him in charge of all of his possessions. I mean, this is huge. I mean, all that is, who is the master who's going to put him in charge of all of his possession? Because he's been faithful with a little, he's going to put him in charge of more. See, the response or the reward is more responsibility. The oversight of all should be a motivation to be a good and faithful servant. You get more responsibility. It doesn't mean you're burdened. It's just like I am involved more with what God is doing. So, reward involves giving those who are faithful even greater oversight. So the true reward for the righteous, faithful, and sensible servant is the master puts them in charge of more. And the thing is that all that is at his disposal, he helps us. Another one, talking about how God might in his reward. Let's go to Luke chapter 22. In Luke chapter 22 and verse 29, it starts there. Just as my Father has granted me a kingdom, I grant you, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and you will sit on thrones judging the 12 tribes of Israel. This is the grant or the gift of the kingdom for the disciples, to sit on thrones, there's a ruling capacity, there's an involvement capacity. And what it does is it connects us to understanding of what they mean by what a ruling or a throne, a privileged place. The eternal state has a privileged place, and it has some jurisdiction related to Israel, responsibility. And so the thing is that you want to be ready for whatever he would choose to reward us. Let's go back to Luke chapter 12 to see more. Now it gets into the warning part. You say, well, that doesn't motivate me. I don't really want a kingdom. If I'm just in heaven, I'm good. Okay? Well, there's a warning to neglect your responsibility. So some try to overdo it and exhaust themselves. Some are just doing their function like they should. But then there's some who neglect it. And that's Luke 12:45. But if that slave says in his heart, my master will be a long time in coming, and begins to beat the slaves, both men and women, and to eat, drink, and get drunk. So this is the neglecting disposition. This is not being ready. The thought of his heart is the Lord will come at a long time off. So he begins to mistreat those people he's in charge of. He neglects his assignment. He doesn't carry out his work. That'd be like a person not using. You may say, well, I don't want to misuse my gift, so I won't do anything. Well, that's to neglect it. You'd have to reflect on this. How you treat others helps to determine your faithfulness and attentiveness to the Lord's return. A sense of distant accountability can easily breed irresponsibility towards other people. Well, the manager's not coming in, the owner's not going to come in for a couple weeks, so a couple months, so I can just do what I want. There's no accountability. And the reason why they put video monitors in various places and so that the owner sometimes can watch to see what's going on. Because accountability, it's not that he wants to see everything, and human nature is accountability brings a different kind of disposition. And this idea, maybe the parallel, he begins to beat them and hurt them, and he abuses them, and the thing is then he eats and gets drunk. And so what happens is he uses his capacities he uses his responsibilities by shorting other people's food, in this analogy, and then he shorts them so that he can use more of it. So the reason why he gets drunk is because he has more than his rations. It's kind of like on a ship. When they used to have ship, they would, ration out food, they would ration out stuff, but the only way that you could consume more was to take other people's rations and consume them, because you had a certain time length that you had to make sure you matched. So he neglected his basic managerial responsibilities. So why does he do this? Because he's not ready that the Lord would come and hold him accountable for that. If you are rightly prepared or not rightly prepared, you become abusive in how you treat people. And the thing is that accountability is the idea of the Lord coming, mistreating people under your charge. The thing is that this happens in areas, especially even in ministry. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 20, it says this, for you tolerate if anyone enslaves you, anyone devours you, anyone takes advantage of you, anyone exalts himself, anyone hits you in the face. And the thing is that Paul is contrasting between people that they had tolerated acting this way. Some supposed leaders who could be cruel and vicious. Yeah, that abusive. Those people are not ready. Because that is not a ready disposition. Let's turn to 3 John. Here's another one in 3 John, Diotrephes. And the thing is that there's always going to be people who are not ready, and there is a price for not being ready and being abusive. And this is in 3 John at verse 9, and it says, I wrote something to the church, but Diotrephes, look at this, who loves to be first among them, does not accept what we say. I mean, he doesn't say this guy's a heretic. He says that he has this attitude that somehow he doesn't have to respond even to the Apostle Paul. The thing is, it's easy to take when you don't think about the Lord's church, taking care of it, that you can act uncivil. And he warns against that. See, it is the coming of Christ, or the realization that Jesus could show up to the service, that helps keep somebody in the right frame of mind. If Jesus is coming today, that's how we act like that. It's going to keep us. That means we're seeking the kingdom. With that kind of disposition, we are not seeking the kingdom if we power trip over people and abuse people, even in the name of ministry. That is not what ministry is for. Ministry is to help other people, to distribute and care for them under your responsibility. He goes further. Let's go back to Luke chapter 12, verse 46. An unexpected coming for this unready servant. It says, the master of that slave, when he will come on a day when he does not expect him, at an hour that he does not know, and will cut him in pieces and assign him a place with the unbeliever. Now, this is what I told you at the beginning, that there was kind of this tension, like, how does this kind of fit? First off, we realize this unexpected arrival comes, and he's just not prepared. And this is where the harshness, he says he cuts him in pieces. He cuts him up. And then he says you're going to have some sort of assigned role or place with the unbelievers. That also creates another tension, like, how does this fit? Does this fit like, is this, this talking about false teachers, they're going to be tossed in with unbelievers? That doesn't seem to fit. Doesn't seem to fit very well. But yet the same thing, he tells them that he's going to chop them in pieces. That kind of seems harsh for the believer. Chop them up. I mean, of course, we use a figurative sense of, when the boss came back, he chopped me in pieces verbally. And he assigns a new assignment could involve dealing with unbelievers. Now, I thought about this, how could this fit? Could fit if you weren't ready for the coming of Christ and you weren't prepped in the kingdom, you'll have to deal with unbelievers. Okay, that might be a task at which you have to deal with. You get to deal with these particular people. I don't know. It just gives this warning that somehow your future association after the coming of Christ is somehow going to have this flavor. I don't know how you deal with that with being changed and glorified, but Jesus doesn't clarify that. This is the tension. How do I fit this in? I could just ignore it and say, I'll just take whatever comes, but there is a harshness. I mean, just the loss of reward, like it talks about in the judgment seat of Christ, that has a sense of pain to it for the believer, even though he's saved. And we'll see, too, that it's going to talk about more lashes and less lashes, which also gives it kind of a tough understanding. Let's go over to Matthew. We've got a little bit of time. Let's go to Matthew 24:51. This just adds to the tension of what Jesus really, the point of what he may be saying, because he adds a component to it. Matthew 24:51, it says, and will cut him in pieces, same thing, and assign him a place with the hypocrite. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now this makes the jurisdiction or the association a little different. The kingdom might be fine, but how do you do this? In one sense, is he to be in company with these people? But it seems to be that he's not really associated with them. He doesn't fit them. It says it could refer to some responsibility to those bound for hell. I mean, it seems to be that he's going to be with pretenders, but he's not. That he's with unbelievers, but he's really not. So the place is characterized by weeping and gnashing of teeth. I don't know fully how to apply this, but I don't want to diminish it so that it doesn't fit us at all. Okay? I gave you some ideas. You just need to think about that. Let's go back to Luke 12 where it gets the unprepared servant is spoken about again. And then this is in verse 45. How is it, this preparedness, how do I know I'm ready? It says, and the slave who knew his master's will and did not get ready or act according to his will receive many lashes. And so part of being ready, part of it is connected to what I know, what I am aware of. So being ready involves consistently acting according to the master's will. The slave knew his master's will and was not ready to show it because he was not acting according to his will. So he knew. He knew. So the more you know, the more you are aware, the more you're expected to be ready, or there is more accountability. More accountability. The lashes are many for somebody who knew. So that doesn't mean that we remain ignorant, but you already know right now, so you already can't claim that. But the idea is that my preparation and my activity of seeking the kingdom first is measured or compared with how much I know about my master's will. I am very accountable. I know much about it. So much is expected. And I realize that, the expectation. Me and Dave realize that as leaders, we expect that is the weight of responsibility. I can't just act as if I'm a new believer. Okay? I can't just carry on the activity of a new believer and, be here and there and not consistent. That's all right, a new believer. But not for somebody who knows and understands his master's will. You are not ready if you need to fix things that are very important, but you are just biding your time, thinking you can fix them later at a time before Jesus arrives. That means you're not ready. If you're not ready and you know better, there's some severity that will increase because you know. You know. Like James chapter 4, verse 17, therefore to the one who knows the right thing to do based upon his knowledge and does not do it, to him it is sin. The idea it is measured out according to how much I know, how much I've been given. How much have I been given? This leads into Luke chapter 12, verse 48. But to the one who did not know it and committed deeds worthy of flogging will receive but few. So this is the other one. This is ignorance. What about I just claim some ignorance? I just don't know. Well, there's still going to be an accounting. Because you can't say, well, I'm not going to know. And then, well, if you want less, but it's just ignorance is not going to be helpful for you. So the punishment and the consequences are measured according to one's knowledge and actions. This is the way, the standard measure. This is the warning of it. Who is this parable talking about? Who is this rich toward God? Who is the fool? Who is this think about it, am I ready? Sometimes we're ignorant because we don't investigate. We don't consider and we don't listen. Okay? And we're held accountable for that. Because people should be asking, should be probing, should be looking. The greater the gift and giftedness, the greater responsibility. But then it goes further and says, to whom they entrusted much, of him they will ask all the more. And as I contemplate what I've been given, I need to think about how large it is. If I see the value, I've been given much, then I need to carry out much. I can't measure myself by the lowest common denominator. You understand? Well, this new believer only does this, and this is how they're taking care of their job. I'll set the standard by that. You can't do that. you're not ready. The idea is it's going to be measured. How long have you been a Christian? How much education have you had in what the truth is? That's what you're going to be held to. What you know, the church. I mean, it's different if you're in a country where you're persecuted and there's a few believers. That's not so. I mean, we have the vastness to understand more about the Bible than any other time. I mean, you can study it online, especially in America. And we don't want to neglect it. It is measured by how I'm taking care. If you're faithful with a little, you'll be faithful with much. Part of what God does is give you more of who He is and more of the responsibility of functioning with Him. Remember, responsibility is just serving with Jesus and more responsibilities. You just get to see Him more. Like it says in James chapter 3, verse 1, do not become teachers, many of you, my brethren, knowing that such will incur a stricter judgment. If you're going to teach as a pastor or teaching, you're held accountable. Stricter judgment. Holding your life restricted according to what Scripture says to be accurate what you said. So let's kind of wrap this up, pull this together. It's really up to you to determine how ready you are. This is not from somebody else. We stand to really face a critical time of decision in our own life, and we're called to be prepared. And the thing is, it's not about external obligations. It's not about, again, the typical crisis selling companies want to sell you something to get ready for the coming of Christ. But that's not it. Do you notice the marks of being ready? And then embrace them fully. If you don't understand what it means, then you need to look into it. You need to make sure you got this one hammered down and ready. Otherwise, you will not like the outcome. However it might explain itself, I wouldn't do that. Well, you could just label it all unbelievers. I wouldn't do that. Jesus didn't answer it specifically and narrow it down to somebody else. He wants us to think about it. It's important. Jesus certainly is returning. No doubts about it. That is inescapable. And the thing is that there will be an evaluation based upon what you know, even if it's reward and loss of it. So we also have this. There is opportunity for greater reward and greater responsibility, and you want to reap the benefits of it. And the warning is, the greater you know, the stricter the evaluation and judgment. So we have to really sift through the distractions of life, discard the hindrance to our spiritual readiness. We must take advantage to turn our worldly benefits into benefits when Jesus comes. What will please Him? And we need to be in community with believers in such a way as to use our gifts to help others and help them to grow. That's being ready. We need to use our zeal to share the gospel as the Spirit leads us, and we need to prioritize the kingdom above all else. Then you will find purpose and meaning. Then it will be good when He returns. It's a clear choice. Time to act is now. Will you be ready? I leave that with you. If you would bow your heads, close your eyes, just think about this in regard to yourself. First off, the first stages of being ready is to know that you are a child of God, that Jesus Christ is your Lord, and you are His servant. You are His child. If you don't know Jesus as Lord and confess Him openly as your Savior, then you need to come to know Him and believe on Him. Trust in Him completely. If you do know him, you need to know what he expects. Are you ready? Time to get ready. We still have today, right now, to get ready. Ready with our attitude, ready with our disposition. We've seen in this that he is for sure coming back. Sure coming back. We don't know the time, exact date, but it is sure. And there is an evaluation. And I encourage you to be ready. Father, we take this with seriousness, not with a fear, not with a sense of just doing what you asked us, carrying out your purpose, taking care of people that you've put a responsibility for us to take care of, using our spiritual gift. It doesn't have to be drudgery, but you'll lead us. And Lord, may we be generous in caring about your return. And Lord, may we look with great delight, but may we also heed the warning. Both are to motivate us to seek the kingdom first. And we thank you for both of these. In Jesus' name, amen.